tense situation outside with protesters, many of whom were listening to President Trump's speech from this morning near the White House, and they marched down to Capitol Hill. Right outside the Capitol, there are scores of protesters outside this building right now, and we have been told by Capitol Police that the Capitol is in lockdown and that people cannot leave the building. Our colleague Ted Barrett just tried to leave the Capitol building. The officers have said the building's in lockdown. He and others, we've been ordered to stay in our offices, so we cannot leave the building. Now, we've been told that there have been some of the protesters have breached the security perimeter. There are barricades around the building, and some protesters apparently have breached that perimeter, which has led to this escalating situation with police. Now, this comes in the aftermath of the Cannon office building, which is in the House side of the Capitol, in the southeast of the Capitol, which had just been evacuated. The staff members and people who were working in that building were asked to leave the building, go into the tunnels between the two office buildings in the House side. Also, the James Madison building, which is part of the Library of Congress, was also asked to be evacuated. Now, the Capitol Police was investigating what they considered a suspicious package on the Cannon building. That has now been cleared, so people, staff members, and the like can return to their offices in the Cannon building. But the United States Capitol building, which of course is where you're seeing the debate happening in the Senate right now, and also on the House side, the building itself is in lockdown. So reporters, staff members, and others are not allowed to leave the building at the moment because of what is considered to be a pretty tense situation with supporters, many Trump supporters who are protesting what is happening here in the building.
These are basically all pro-Trump supporters who have gathered in these huge numbers, walking over from the area near the White House up to Capitol Hill. And we see these huge crowds up there. That's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, that's what it is. When just looking outside the building, I can see scores and scores of protesters on the lawn of the Capitol, and the police have been prepared for this. They've been prepared for many days. There usually are barricades around the Capitol, but there have been more barricades to extend the perimeter around this building, given that many lawmakers come and they park their cars in the lot just outside the Capitol grounds. But they had extended that perimeter, but it appears, according to what we have been told, that some of these protesters have breached that perimeter, and that's led to back and forth a tense situation with the police. Now, we're still trying to gather more information about what exactly is going on, but at the moment, Wolf, amid this very tense, bitter, and divisive debate on Capitol Hill, a tense situation outside, leading to an unusual situation here in the Capitol, where people like ourselves have been told we can't leave because this building is in lockdown.
Cosmano, I see we've got this huge crowd right in front of where the inauguration on January 20th is going to be taking place. They've gathered very, very close. You can see the construction for the inauguration of Joe Biden as President of the United States, Kamala Harris as Vice President of the United States. But right in front, where normally there would be a big crowd waiting to watch, they've gathered, mostly not wearing masks, no social distancing. They're just moving closer and closer to Capitol Hill.
Yeah, and it's actually on both sides of the Capitol. You're looking at the west front of the Capitol, but there's also on the east front of the Capitol, which is really the cause of concern for the police officers, because that is typically the side in which House members, senators, and others who work in this building enter from the east side of the Capitol, and that's where the barricades have been placed to essentially push these demonstrators towards the grassy area that in between the Capitol and the Supreme Court building. But that area on the east side of the Capitol is the one that is a cause of concern. And the buildings that have been evacuated earlier on the southeast side of the Capitol, which is the House office buildings where members of Congress, members of the House, their staff work, where they work, that had initially been a source of concern. But there appear to be multiple concerns here as this protest, this demonstration outside gets more and more tense, as Capitol police officers are taking precautions and telling people in the building, the Capitol building, don't leave because of the concerns about the security.
We know U.S. Capitol Police, they're in charge over there, but the D.C. Mayor, Muriel Bowser, she did ask the D.C. National Guard to be activated in anticipation, potentially, of some violence emerging yesterday and today, for that matter. Do you see members of the D.C. National Guard up on Capitol Hill right now?
I don't see them, Wolf, because I'm inside the building. I've seen many Capitol Police. It's very possible there are DC National Guard and others helping with the situation outside. But this is a building that is heavily fortified, and initially there are lots of police officers at every exit and every door. There are more today because of the expectation of this huge rally. And let's not forget that President Trump has repeatedly promoted this rally. He said, January 6th, I will see you there. He's told his supporters that this is the opportunity to overturn the election when we know that is simply not going to happen. Simply, there's just too many people who oppose taking such an unprecedented action to defy the Constitution and essentially have Congress hand him the victory here. But he has told his supporters something else, that this is the time where they can win, and he's revved them up, and many of them are outside. They're angry. They want Congress to act, and it's not going the way that they expect. So we expect this to play out all day today. We'll see how long the demonstrations last, if it goes from the day to the night, because we expect the proceedings on Capitol Hill to go up until the early morning hours. We'll see if the demonstrations last that long as well.
I noticed that the Republican leader in the House, Kevin McCarthy, just issued a statement calling on the protesters to engage in peaceful demonstrations. Clearly, there's a lot of concern, not just from the Democratic leadership, but the Republican leadership as well.
Yeah, no question about it, because a lot of these House members, it's their office buildings where a lot of them gather, where their staff work, where their staff are right now and are concerned about their safety. That's where a lot of the demonstration is at the moment. There are, as I said, on the east side of the Capitol, the southeast side of the Capitol, that's where the House buildings are, and we're seeing a lot of protesters gather around there. So Kevin McCarthy making that statement important. It'll be important also for the president also to urge his demonstrators to engage in civil discourse outside. So uncertain what will happen, Wolf, but clearly Capitol Police recognize how serious of a situation this is and doing everything they can to keep things tense and peaceful.
You've covered Capitol Hill, Manu, for a long time. How unusual is this, what we're seeing unfold right now?
It's pretty unusual. Now, we have seen many protests over the years. Some get more tense than others. Some get violent, but typically not like this. Not from my time covering this building, I really can only remember maybe once or twice being in lockdown in a situation like this. And I've been covering Capitol Hill for almost 20 years now. So it's very rare to be told you can't leave the building. So that's unusual, but it's unclear exactly what is happening outside that has prompted this, other than the fact that we have heard that some protesters have breached the perimeter. We're not certain what else beyond that at the moment, but to be told not to leave is unusual. It just shows the precautions that everybody's taken, given that all 535 members of Congress are inside, the Vice President of the United States is inside, and other staff members and others here during this critical moment in which Joe Biden's victory will be official.
All right, I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Jim Acosta. Right now, the president spoke just a little while ago. He seemed to be encouraging these protesters to get out there on the streets and make their voices heard. Now, peaceful protesting is good, but if there's violence, not good, Jim.
No, that's absolutely right, Wolf. And this is what the president said just a short time ago during those remarks down on the National Mall when he was talking about how he wanted to overturn the results of the election. He said, we're going to try and give our Republicans, the weak ones, because the strong ones don't need any of our help. We are going to try and give them the kind of pride and boldness that they need to take back our country. So let's walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. The president indicated a couple of times during his remarks earlier today that he was going to go down to the Capitol. We've been sort of waved off of that by the White House. But at this point, Wolf, we have not heard anything from President Trump telling these protesters to stand back and stand by, to use a phrase he used during those presidential debates when talking about the Proud Boys. Wolf, this is a president who has been egging on his supporters for weeks now. We heard him earlier today down on the ellipse by the White House, by the National Mall, once again saying that these results from the election should be thrown out, that Mike Pence, his vice president, should be a part of that kind of attempted coup up on Capitol Hill. The vice president has said he's not going to do that. Wolf, and it's worth reminding people, we were here on June 1st when there were protests outside the grounds of the White House when the Trump administration used tear gas and public protesters to bring calm to that situation.
Jim,
over
hold
there
on for one moment. Hold on for a moment, Jim.
The president's not doing that kind of thing today.
Alexander Marquardt is there right in the middle of all of this. He's joining us on the phone right now. So, Alex, explain what you're seeing and what you're hearing. How worried are the folks where you are?
Well, they're not worried. In fact, Wolf, they're certainly energized. We're on the western side of the Capitol, right where the inauguration is going to take place in 2 weeks. And there's been a significant escalation in just the last few moments. The protesters had been relatively peaceful and held at bay by a police line. In the last few minutes, they have broken through that police line. I'm watching as we speak throngs of protesters climbing the steps on the western side of the Capitol. They have reached up onto the terrace of the Capitol. I can see at least half a dozen protesters scaling, literally climbing the walls of the Capitol to get up to where their fellow protesters are. In response, the police have fired tear gas. We've had several rounds of tear gas, and they have had protesters choking and their eyes streaming. Wolf, it is hard to say what the police presence is out here. I cannot see any sort of law enforcement. Right now, everything I'm seeing is protesters getting onto the grounds of the Capitol with very little pushback from law enforcement. Wolf?
Yeah, and we anticipated something like this could happen. That's why the mayor of Washington, D.C. asked that the D.C. National Guard be activated. But what I hear you saying, Alex, is you don't see Capitol Police, you don't see military, National Guard on the scene right now, but you see a lot of protesters going through, breaching Capitol Hill steps, getting to areas where clearly they're breaking the law. Do they understand they potentially could be arrested, sent to jail for what they're doing?
I assume they certainly do, but that they don't care at all. There have been law enforcement, including what I imagine to be park police up there. They are no longer here. There are different movements, it seems, within this group of protesters. There have been some who wanted to protest peacefully, who are asking others to leave this side of the Capitol to go to another side to carry out a peaceful protest. But in just the past few moments, there has been a lot of momentum within this protest, with people calling for their fellow protesters and activists to essentially storm the Capitol, to get up those steps. And right now, Wolf, what I'm looking at are scores of protesters up on the terrace of the Capitol where this inauguration is going to take place, holding all sorts of flags, Trump flags, American flags, don't tread on me flags. The people that I'm looking at here appear to feel like they do have the upper hand, and I'm not seeing any sort of sign of law enforcement right now from where I am.
Well, that's not good at all. Stand by. Phil Mattingly is up on Capitol Hill. You're watching what's going on. Phil, you've covered Capitol Hill for a long time. What are you seeing?
Yeah, Wolf, I think let's start from the basics of what the Capitol Police were trying to do going into this day, what they do for those big events. They set up a security perimeter of fences about 100, 150 feet away from the actual building itself. The general public is not allowed in there. You're not allowed through there unless you have a pass. Those barricades have been completely busted through at this point. There's thousands of people now that have gone through those barricades. The Capitol Police, based on where I am across the street, watching this transpire, the Capitol Police have basically backed off closer into the building to try and circle the perimeter of the Capitol building itself. The bigger issue right now, it would appear, is the number of protesters, and they are clearly in the hundreds, who have now climbed up the steps of the Capitol building. This is an area that the general public is never allowed on, even in normal days, certainly not a day like today. They've essentially overtaken the front of the Capitol, and not just hundreds of people having climbed onto the Capitol building and up the steps of the Capitol building itself, the center steps of the Capitol, but also thousands more on the ground waiting there. So the word we've gotten right now is essentially from Capitol Police, the Capitol building itself is shut down. It's locked down. Nobody's leaving the building. But I think the bigger question right now is this is an overwhelming number of people for the Capitol Police and for what they're prepared for. Well, you know this as well as anybody. There's been no shortage of huge events and very large protests in Washington, D.C. that come around the Capitol, that are near the Capitol, that are focused on the Capitol. And I've just simply never seen anything like this. Not just the breaching of the barricades, but the actual climbing onto the Capitol building in the pavilion itself. They are not physically inside the building, but they are standing right at the doors from the center steps to get into the building right now. So obviously a lot of concern internally between Capitol Police, between staff around here, in terms of what's going to happen next and what the actual goals are. Wolf.
Yeah, I've covered a lot of huge demonstrations.